Welcome to Folklore for Sleep. Tonight, let us drift back to a time when the North was not just a place, but a presence. A world of mist-covered waters, creaking wooden boats, and wind that carried whispers from the beyond. We return not to the battlefield, but to the edge of the known world, where everyday people lived in rhythm with the tides and in quiet reverence for the powers they could not see. Where salt clung to everything, and stories floated between fish nets and firesides. This is not a tale of warriors or conquests. Tonight, we follow the folklore of those who lived beneath the weight of the sky, beside the breath of the sea. We'll spend time with the fishermen who listen to the waves for warnings, not just weather. We'll walk in the memories of a seeress who journeyed farther than most men dared. We'll pause to understand the long ships that served as graves and the meaning they carried. And we'll end in the mead halls of those who claimed descent from gods, where myth and power shared the same cup. Let your shoulders ease, let your thoughts slow, and as the tides of old Norse memory rise to meet us, allow yourself to gently drift into the folklore of the North. Imagine yourself waking in darkness, not the kind of darkness that stirs fear, but one that belongs. It wraps around your small stone house like an old cloak, familiar, slightly damp, and worn at the edges. You are not a raider, not a sailor on some bold expedition. You are something simpler, and in many ways harder. You are a coastal fisher in a Norse village tucked against a rugged fjord. It is the 9th or 10th century, and here, life is bound to water and weather. Outside your home, wind hums across the roof of turf and heather. You hear it like a slow breath across the land. The hearth is cold. The fire has long since faded to ash, but you do not mind. You are used to cold. The salt in your hair, the ache in your joints, these are constants. You rise early, always early. The sea does not wait, nor do your neighbors. The first tasks are quiet, pulling on woolen clothes, rubbing a bit of oil into cracked hands, checking the nets with half-lidded eyes. You step outside into air that smells of smoke, brine, and frozen soil. The sea is just beyond the ridge, its surface a dull sheet of lead beneath the gray morning. Sometimes you think it watches you. The boat is small, carved from pine. It rocks gently in its mooring, creaking like an old man with stories left untold. You push off alone, or perhaps with a cousin, or a quiet friend who shares your rhythm. Conversation is rare before the sun lifts, if it lifts at all. Rowing out into the fjord, you hear nothing but or against water and the distant, echoing cry of a seabird overhead. There is peace here, and there is something else, something older. The Norse called them Vedir, land and water spirits. It is said they lived in stones, in cliffs, in the spray of the waves. You do not test their patience. You leave a carved token at the dock before every journey. A gesture, a warning, a prayer. Fishing is not dramatic. You lower your line. You wait. Your hands grow stiff in the cold, but they do not tremble. When the cod bites, you pull. When it resists, you yield, then pull again. You do not celebrate a good catch, nor do you curse a poor one. This is the rhythm of the sea, and it cares little for moods. There are stories passed down from older fishermen, now long dead, of whales that sing in tongues and seals that steal names, of the drowned who do not rest, but walk the shores in windless fog. You've never seen such things, but you don't scoff at them either, because once, when the light was strange, and your cousin swore he saw a woman with kelp for hair standing knee-deep in the tide, you didn't ask questions. You simply handed him a carved bone charm. and said nothing more. Back on shore, the fish is cleaned, not with haste, but with reverence. The bones are not discarded carelessly. They are placed in tidal pools or beneath stones. No one knows why anymore, but the elders say to do it. So you do. Later, the smokehouse fills with the soft scent of burning alder wood and briny flesh. The smell is strong, but not unpleasant. It clings to everything: your tunic, your hair, even your dreams. And in the evening, the sea still speaks. Not in words, of course, but in shifting waves, in sea foam, in the strange silence that falls just before a storm. Before bed, you run your fingers along a small wooden figure carved years ago. A sea spirit, perhaps, or a god, or both. You do not speak aloud, but in your thoughts, you ask only that tomorrow the fish will come and the wind will stay kind. Then you lie down on straw-stuffed bedding, wrapped in wool, and let the weight of the sea lull you to sleep. The life of a Viking fisherman was not heroic. It was not famous, but it was enduring, and in it, there lived stories far older than kings. Now, let us turn from the waves and walk alongside one who left these shores not to raid or conquer, but to explore. A woman whose steps carved new paths in legend and land. Imagine yourself standing on the shore, not of Norway or Iceland, but a stranger land still touched by cold wind and drift ice. The sky is vast. The land feels unfinished, like the gods once shaped it, but left before they were done. Here, where the soil is thin and the sun lingers strangely in the summer sky, there is a woman, wrapped in wool, silent, watching the horizon. Her name is Gudrid, or perhaps it was once something older, worn smooth by time and tale. To some, she was a seeress. To others, a traveler. To us, she is a voice from the fog, a legend in the shape of a woman. In the sagas of the Norse, her story flickers like a candle in the dark. Born in Iceland, married in Greenland, sailed to Vinland, and touched the edge of the unknown. But she was no shield maiden, no queen. Her magic, if it was magic, was quieter, rooted in words and vision, not steel. Let us go back to her earliest memory. The smell of ash and milk porridge, the whisper of runes being carved into bone, a grandmother who spoke to the wind and poured milk on stones to honor the spirits. This was the world Gudrid was born into, a place where the old ways still breathe through everyday things. When her family moved to Greenland, they joined Eric the Red settlement, a fragile finger of humanity clinging to ice and isolation. The winters were long, the nights longer still, and it was in one of these winters that something strange happened. The saga says a Volva came to the settlement, a seeress with staff in hand and catskin cloak around her shoulders. She sat in the center of the hall, surrounded by quiet songs and the scent of herbs. She spoke of omens, of spirits, of futures woven like nets in a dark ocean, and Gudrid was asked to sing for her. It was said she had a voice like snow on stone, soft, steady, and full of something older than herself. The song she sang was not her own. It came from deep within her, or perhaps from beyond. After that night, things began to change. Gudrid sailed again, not toward home, but farther, past icebergs, past known maps, to Vinland, what we now think of as coastal North America. There, she bore a child. There, she walked through forests thick with birdsong and mystery. But always there were signs. A man in red who vanished into the woods. A voice in the wind, calling her name in a language she didn't know. A feeling that she was not the first to dream of this land. She returned to Greenland, then Iceland, then later Rome. But her journeys are not measured only in distance. They are marked by the way stories formed around her, softly, like snow falling in silence. Some say she gave up all worldly things and became a pilgrim. Others claim she lived in a simple hut, carving runes into driftwood and burning sage to keep the sea spirits at bay. None can say for certain. The sagas are not precise. They shift like the tide. But there is a strange echo in her tale. Not just the journey of a woman through far-flung lands, but the journey of a soul through old beliefs, fading gods, and the gentle hush that comes when a world begins to forget its magic. Tonight, we remember her, not as a hero, not as a myth, but as a quiet current in the great sea of time. A woman who walked far and saw much, and perhaps carried a bit of the other world with her in the lining of her cloak. And now, we turn from Gudrun's footsteps to the resting places of her kin, to ships buried in ice and earth, to bones laid to rest, not beneath stones, but within vessels meant for journeys beyond the sea and sky. Imagine now a ship resting not on waves, but under soil, its timbers buried in the frozen earth, its sails long since vanished, its ribs curled like a sleeping beast beneath the sky. This is not a ship for sailing, but for remembering, and for something more. In the old Norse lands, across Norway, Sweden, Iceland, and the windswept Isles of Scotland, death was not an end, but a passage, and ships were the vessels of that journey. The practice was old, older than the sagas. A high-status person, chieftain, warrior, perhaps even a revered woman, might be buried in a ship, not set adrift, as some stories suggest, but nestled within the earth. A boat laid down into a pit, sometimes fully intact, sometimes symbolic. The body placed inside, surrounded by possessions, weapons, jewelry, food, animals, sometimes servants, sometimes horses, sometimes something stranger. The most famous example is the Oseberg ship, buried in a mound in Norway around the year 834. Inside, the remains of two women, one older, one younger. To this day, we do not know who they were, but the richness of the grave, the silks, the carved sledges, the sacrificed animals suggests reverence. Perhaps the elder was a Volva, a seeress, perhaps a queen, perhaps both. The ship itself is a wonder. Carved prow curling like a serpent, oars aligned with purpose. A vessel built not for utility, but for ceremony, to send its passenger from this world into the unknown. The Norse concept of the afterlife was not singular. There was Valhalla, yes, the great hall of the slain, but that was reserved for a warrior's death. For others, there were different destinations. Folkvanger, the field of the goddess Freya. Helheim, the quiet realm of the dead, not hellish in the modern sense, but cold, distant, slow. Some dead were believed to remain near the living. They became drakkar, restless spirits, corporeal, heavy, and dangerous, but not always malicious. Sometimes simply confused or unfinished. To prevent this, care was taken. A shoe was tied to the corpse backwards, a scythe placed over the chest, nails driven into the soles of the feet, all to keep the spirit still, to prevent it from rising. There were tales of ships buried with curses, runes carved not for honor, but for warning. One inscription, found near a grave mound, reads, "Whoever disturbs this grave, let them be consumed by the roots of the earth." But most graves were not threatening. They were offerings, messages to the gods, a way of saying, "We remember, we respect, we release." Burial mounds dotted the landscape, round like gentle hills, their shapes slowly lost to time. Sheep grazed over them, children played near them, and beneath, the past slept on, undisturbed. Not all were buried so grandly. Common people had simple graves, stones arranged in ship shapes, pointing toward the sea, a quiet gesture, a symbol. And in winter, when the snow fell thick over the land, it was said the dead grew closer, that their breath could be heard in the wind, that dreams carried messages from ancestors, that the line between this world and the next was as thin as frost on a window. Tonight, as we lie warm beneath our own covers, spare a thought for those ancient sleepers, for the women of Oseberg, laid to rest with sledges and silks, for the ship burials near the fjords, where bone and story mingle in the soil. They are gone, but not lost. Their vessels remain, cradled by earth. Their spirits, perhaps, sail still. And now, we rise from the cold soil and into the warmth of firelight and feasting. In our final chapter, we enter the long houses of the Jarls, the nobles, the lords, the storytellers and dreamers who traced their bloodlines to gods and demanded the world believe it. Imagine yourself now, stepping out of the cold. The wind that howled across the fjord falls behind you as you cross the threshold into a great hall. It is dimly lit, just enough to make out the long beams overhead, carved with serpents and knotwork, shadows dancing across their curling forms. The warmth hits you slowly, not as a wave, but as a gentle presence. You smell wood smoke, roasted meat, a hint of mead, sweet and sharp. This is the seat of a Jarl, a Norse noble. Not a king, perhaps, but close. A man or woman who commands loyalty, land, and legacy. And the people who gather here tonight, they are not simply guests. They are witnesses to power, to tradition, to myth. The feasting hall is not merely a place to eat. It is a theater of memory. Here, the great deeds of ancestors are recited. Here, bloodlines are recounted like sacred scripture. And here, the gods are never far. The meal begins without ceremony. That is the way. Platters of fish, pork, barley porridge, and for the fortunate, wild game, deer, swan, even bear. Wooden plates passed along rough-hewn tables, fingers slick with fat, conversation kept to a low murmur. At the high seat, the Jarl speaks little. Their presence is enough. Their cloak is trimmed with fur. A silver brooch gleams against dark wool. But the real voice in the room belongs to the skald, the bard. And tonight, the skald begins a tale of Odin. Not the familiar one-eyed god, high upon his throne, but a stranger version, wandering the roads, cloaked in shadow, trading riddles for secrets. The Jarl listens, so do the guests, because in this story they see themselves. The nobility of Viking Age Scandinavia often claimed descent from gods, especially Odin. To say one's great-great-grandfather had divine blood was not considered boastful. It was foundational, a kind of truth too old to question. The feasts then became rituals. The meat, not just food, but offering. The drink, not just mead, but memory. The stories, not just entertainment, but lineage. And between the cracks of these long nights, folklore bloomed. It was said that Odin wandered disguised through the lands of men, testing their generosity. That Loki, the trickster, might appear the fire, asking riddles. That elves and hidden folk gathered near the hearthstones, invisible to the rude, but visible to the reverent. Even the architecture whispered old beliefs. The high seat was sacred, flanked by carved animal heads. Sometimes a horse skull was buried beneath it. Protection, or perhaps invitation. To dine in this hall was to step into a living myth. The nobles were not immune to fear. Storms, poor harvests, betrayal, these touched them too. But they responded with ritual, not panic. A goat sacrificed, a song sung backwards, a whisper into the ear of a carved god figure left in the grain chest. Power was not just muscle and metal. It was the ability to shape story, to anchor oneself within a world that believed everything was connected, to stand not above others, but within something vast and sacred. And when the feast ended, when the fire died low, when the skald's voice fell into a hush, guests would lie in the hayloft above, wrapped in cloaks, bellies full, minds turning slowly over the story just told. Not for excitement, not for fear, but for comfort, because to live with myth was to never be alone. So now we return from the fire-lit halls of nobles to the salt-soaked boats of fishermen, from the forgotten graves beneath snow to the far-off footsteps of a woman who walked with ghosts. The north is quiet now. The winds have softened. The ships rest. The tales for night are finished. But in the hush that remains, something lingers. A rhythm, a memory, a story, perhaps, waiting to visit you in sleep. Thank you for joining Folklore for Sleep. May the sea be still. May the night be kind. And may your dreams carry you gently where myth and memory meet. Good night.